So, hello everyone. Today is May 31st, 2022. My name is Helen Pu, and today I'll be interviewing Mr. Shariq Ghani on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive. So, thank you so much, Mr. Ghani, for agreeing to interview with us. We'll begin by hearing about your early life and childhood. Um, so, first of all, like, where and when were you born?
Well, I was born in Houston, Texas, in the early 1980s. I was born in 1981. Right here in Houston, Texas. My parents immigrated from Pakistan. My dad arrived in Florida from Karachi to do his studies at Florida International Universities. He did a double master's, and he came in the early 70s. My mother came in the late 70s, and she immigrated straight to Queens.
Okay, very cool. And do you have any siblings?
I do. I have two younger sisters, Davinda and Tuba.
Mhm.
They're both younger than me. I'm the eldest, so I was the guinea pig of the family, especially for first generation immigrants.
Right.
I was a test subject.
And were your siblings also born and raised in Houston?
They were.
Okay, very cool. So how would you describe the household that you grew up in? So like what family values did your parents emphasize on or whatnot? The dynamic.
Fiercely, I would say it was fiercely Pakistani,
Hmm.
very regimented. But it was a culture of the only way that I can describe it is that it was a culture of success, meaning we were raised and taught that we can do anything that we want. It's
Hmm.
part of the American dream, that we can do anything that we want as long as we make good grades and we focus
Hmm.
and we worship God, right? As long as we've got God in our hearts and we're making good grades, then we're gonna do well in life, right?
Hmm.
Along with staying connected with family. But it was, growing up, because my parents are first generation immigrants, they were raised in a village type atmosphere,
Sure.
right?
Hmm.
There was many aunts, uncles, there's different relatives, even the neighborhood friends were like part of family.
Hmm.
So everyone took part in raising the children, but we were out on our own in a portion of Fort Bend County that was right on the line of A-Leaf. There's no other, there's just not many. There's one other South Asian family on the road. There's really no one for my parents to relate to. There's definitely no Muslims in the area apart from this one South Asian family. So it was just sort of my parents were fending on their own, learning as they went along.
Yeah.
We wanted burgers and pizza for dinner, and they wanted biryani and
Hmm.
samosas. And so it was just a generational clash. It was a cultural
Hmm.
clash, but we got through it.
Yeah, sure. And what was, I guess, the most difficult thing, I guess, having the two generations, two cultural like forces in one household?
I think the most difficult thing was just communicating how we felt.
Mm.
I think that
Yeah.
was just a hard part. It's
Mhm.
what we were going through in school, what it meant to get good grades, what it meant to be included, what it meant to be excluded,
Mhm.
in social circles and in groups at school, just because you looked and you acted differently. I grew up pre 9/11. I graduated class in 99. And so I was the only South Asian. I was the only Muslim in the school at times, but I
Mhm.
was the only South Asian that I knew of in elementary school. In middle school, there's one more. In high school, there are several, but it was just people didn't know who you were. People just always thought I was Latino. And then for my parents not to understand,
Mhm.
just the daily struggles, the
Yeah.
daily struggles, I guess, was always a little difficult.
Yeah. And did it ever get better, or was it kind of just like that, just growing
I
with it?
mean, for me, it got better when I took things in my own hands. My parents came from Pakistan,
Right.
and that was a pretty heavily colonized
Mhm.
area by the British, right?
Sure.
And so my parents' perspective on whenever I would get, excuse me,
No worries.
whenever I would get bullied or whenever there'd be problems, just look the other way, ignore them, just forget about it. But they didn't understand how much it just kept mounting and mounting. And
Mhm.
you look the other way, then 10 other kids would just start jumping on you. And it'd just be like
Yeah.
a whole bandwagon concept. So I think it was seventh or eighth grade. So one kid kept calling me Gandhi boy. And
Mhm.
Gandhi boy at that time, I don't know if it's a slur now, but it was a big slur at that time. And it doesn't help that my last name is also Ghani, Ghani, which is one letter off from Gandhi. But I turned around in class, I was this nerdy looking kid with big glasses,
Mhm,
like, anyways, traditional South Asian type parted
mhm.
hair, dressed in a traditional good boy South Asian way. I turned around and I broke the kid's nose
Oh,
behind
okay.
me. And I was like, don't ever call me that again. And then no one messed with me again after that. And that was nice. But apart from that, it was definitely a little difficult, I
Mhm.
guess.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, still today, there's a lot of Asian American families who are struggling with this because I know, like, communicating with Asian American or Asian parents, especially immigrant parents, is quite difficult. So, what would you kind of recommend or like advise those children who are under those type of parents?
So we still, I mean, in our community, in our Asian community, there's still people who are immigrating over, right?
Sure, right.
And I see immigrant parents who are my age who have kids who are born and raised here,
Hmm.
but they're immigrant parents that are my age. So it's like seeing my parents in real time make the
Mhm.
same mistake with their
Yeah,
kids. I'm like, bro, that's not gonna work.
yeah.
Right. So it's two
Mhm.
parts. It's one, it's advising immigrant parents who are my age, around
Right.
my age,
Sure.
right? Giving them the do's and the don'ts. Like, this is, and let me tell you, unequivocally, almost none of them believe what I have to say.
Hmm.
They're all going to be hard learners. They're all going to get it the wrong way. And they're going to remember, right?
Hmm.
But
Sure.
for the kids, when we talk to the kids, it's just from saying, like, I went through the same thing. You're going to
Hmm.
go through
Right.
it. It's inevitable. But the main thing to remember is that your parents love you so
Mhm.
much that they're trying to do the best that they can.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And the best that they can is by making sure you've got the best grades, that you're focused on the mosque, that they're limiting friend times just because they don't want you to go slumber party every night. And they watch what kind of friends you have.
Mhm.
They watch everything that you eat. It doesn't mean that they hate you or they're upset with you. It's just that they love you so much.
Yeah. That's
Right.
good.
That's the main thing that I want to make sure that kids know.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. So I guess we'll talk a little bit about your education. So you grew up in Houston. What schools did you attend?
So I grew up in the Fort Bend environment. So I
Okay.
went to Stephen F. Austin High School. I was the first
Okay.
graduating class
Sure.
out of Stephen F. Austin High School. My goal was to go into the Marine Corps.
Mm,
That didn't happen. It was during I think it was either the first or second Gulf War.
mm,
I went and I talked to an imam or a cleric in our community, and he was a senior clergy. And I was like, listen, because my parents and I were having the struggles.
mhm.
They envisioned me to be an engineer, a
Sure.
doctor,
Right.
an astronaut, something to do with STEM
Mm,
and higher, right? And I was an ROTC in high school for 4 years. All I wanted to do was go in the military. And it's
mhm.
partly my dad's fault because I grew up on Clint Eastwood and World War II movies. Okay. It's
Mhm.
like every single weekend, if not every other weekend, some kind of military
Yeah.
action movie. So because my dad like romanticized it.
Mhm.
And so it stuck, right?
Mhm.
And so I wanted to go in the Marine Corps. That was the goal. I had lined up scholarships at A&M. I had an appointment for Naval Academy. But I just wanted to enlist. I didn't even want to do the officer route.
Mhm.
And so they said, okay, look, we'll do it. Just go talk to this guy. Go talk to this cleric. And so it was either first or second Gulf War. Went and talked to the guy, someone I very respected.
Mhm.
And he said, will you be killing other Muslims? And I said, there's a chance I might be put in that situation. And then he gave me the rulings, essentially the fatwas, the edicts, and what happens when you kill other Muslims. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I can do this anymore. And so I got out of it, went to HCC, um, went to HCC, landed a tech job when I was 18. I was a network engineer by the time I was 19,
Mhm.
STEM, just like my parents wanted, right? So I was the youngest network engineer in Southwestern Bell. They don't exist anymore. SBC Global or SBC Internet. Worked in the network operations center, did network security, did UT Arlington at the same time. And I was in Dallas. I had shifted to Dallas. Um, didn't do well in school. I was doing way too good in the tech bubble, way too good for,
Mm,
yeah, I was 19 years old and making more money than most people my dad's age. And it was just too much.
yeah.
There's no kid should make that much money. It was ridiculous.
Mm,
And I didn't do well in school because I was like, you know what? I can make this kind of money. What do I need school for? And then the tech bubble burst. I got laid off. And then every job that I had after that, I was the last one in. And then I was the first one to get laid off because I was the last one
Okay.
in,
Yeah.
least amount of seniority. And then I just started my own business. But while I started my own business, I came back to Houston, did U of H. Took me about 8 years to graduate,
Mm.
8 years to graduate with a history degree, but I did it.
Yeah. So I guess like what kind of took you so long in the process?
Well, I didn't really have a focus on education. I
Yeah.
didn't really care about school.
Mm,
I didn't do well in school. Even in high school, I didn't do well in school because my thing was, I'm going to the military anyways. I don't need to
yeah.
do good in school. So what's the point? So I just coasted through. My whole thing was, I'm going to go to the Marines. I already have an appointment
Okay.
at the Naval Academy. I've got ROTC scholarship. I had other options on the table as well, and they were all guaranteed, no
Mhm.
matter what my outcome in high school would have been, essentially.
Yeah.
So I was good. I didn't really have to. So that habit sort of went into college, and in college, I was making money. I was doing good in business. I didn't really need to graduate, or I
Mhm.
guess I really didn't need to focus
Yeah.
on school. But that was something that I really regretted later on because just a couple years ago, I was like, I want to go back to school. I want to learn more. And so I was applying to different universities for master's programs, rejected, because my GPA was horrendous. I had enough of a GPA to graduate, right? The
Yeah.
bare, when I say the bare minimum, I mean the bare minimum to graduate U
Mhm.
of H. And that just didn't happen. And by some miracle, I was able to get into A&M with some stellar recommendation letters and experience. Did a 4.0 at A&M, graduated Homeland Security, finished my Homeland Security studies at A&M
Mhm.
at the Bush School, and now I'm at Columbia.
Okay.
I'm doing the master's program in New York,
Oh, very cool.
hybrid program in conflict resolution negotiation.
Very
But
cool.
21-year-old me would have never imagined
Yeah.
that I'd be an Ivy leaguer one day. That Shariq would just have his mind completely blown.
Right.
Say, why are you wasting your life and your time? Why are you doing that?
Mhm. Yeah. So I know you like touched on like your faith and how that has played a role in your upbringing, especially in your like schooling and deciding not to go to the Marine Corps or whatnot. So could you speak a little more on how faith was kind of there when you were growing up? Like what was it like?
Well, faith was very present when I was growing up. I remember waking up to song or not songs gospel type, the
Mm-hmm.
gospel equivalent in Islam
Uh-huh.
of songs. But then my mom would always have the Quran playing in the background, cassette tapes, because we didn't have CDs back then. So
Mm-hmm.
it was playing on cassette tapes, and then um, but I grew up as a Pakistani Muslim, and that's important for people to understand who don't understand the immigrant experience.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up as an American. I grew up as a Pakistani kid who happens to live in America.
Mm-hmm.
And as a Pakistani kid, I had specific cultural requirements that I would have to fulfill.
Mm-hmm.
The type of respect that I give to my parents. I'd even speak to my parents in Urdu in public, in front of my teachers and my principal, in front of my peers. I'd speak to them in Urdu. I wouldn't speak to them in English. We only spoke in Urdu at home. And because I was a Pakistani, I was also a Muslim. And as a Pakistani Muslim, I did X amount of prayers a day. I did X amount of supplications. I had a regimented schedule of things that I would do that were very Pakistani. And it doesn't, and the reason that I say that is because I was Muslim because I was Pakistani. It's important to
Yeah.
mention that. I also believed in God. I believed in Allah. I believed in Quran, but I was mostly Muslim because I was Pakistani, because it was the Pakistani thing to do.
Yeah.
Anyhow, um, that all changed after 9/11.
Mm.
When the towers fell, I started to question who I was, and I wanted to know more about my identity. And that's when I started to really research. My parents had done everything. They put me into Sunday school. I think they put me into Saturday school. They had hired private people to help me out with my Islamic studies.
Mm.
None of it really stuck though, because again, I was a Pakistani kid, or I was an American kid trapped in a Pakistani body, trying to understand and sort out this cultural, just this whole cultural fusion that just wasn't happening. But 9/11 really just whoosh,
Mm.
brought everything together. that's when I started to understand that I'm an American of Pakistan. I'm an American Muslim of Pakistani heritage.
Mm,
And when I started to make that distinction, I started to understand better who I am and the role that I have to play in life
mhm,
and the way my identity will drive me moving forward. And I'm still, in many ways, I'm still learning what that means. But when I started to question and I started to understand who I was in terms of an American, a Pakistani, and a Muslim,
mhm,
I was able to apply my American culture, question everything that I knew about Islam, because before I wasn't able to ask, how do I know God exists?
yeah.
Why is this the right way? Because
Mhm,
that's a very American thing too. That's an American experience. In a Pakistani household, you don't question that. It's like
right.
blasphemy.
Mhm,
Never mention that.
mhm,
And so after 9/11, I was able to do all that questioning. I was living on my own in Dallas, so I had free reign. And I
mhm,
sort of, I tell many people it's almost like a born again experience, right?
mhm,
I
mhm,
started to reconnect. I went to different conferences, started listening to CDs. We had CDs
mhm,
and reading the translation of the Quran instead of just the Arabic version, which I had no idea what I was reading.
mhm,
And so I started coming into becoming like who I am today,
mhm,
right? And that's when I started to understand what role God played in my life, what role the Quran will play in my life, the holy book of the Muslims, and how I need to move forward.
mhm,
And so from from that moment, Islam has played a pivotal role in everything that I do.
mhm. Yeah. So I guess like maybe briefly, what do you think? So what does like God and the Quran and Islam kind of play as a role in your life? What does
The main thing is that God will be in my life as much as I want him to.
okay.
There's this verse in the Quran,
Mm,
Fadkuruni adkurkum. Remember me and I will remember you. And
mhm,
that's one of my favorite verses in the Quran, which says that I have to take the first step in remembering him.
mhm,
And if I take the first step in remembering him, then God will remember me. And it's the same thing with the story that we're told about Moses. Moses was told to strike the sea with a stick.
yeah.
If God had wanted, he could have parted the seas, but he
Mhm,
told
right.
Moses, strike the sea with a stick, and then he parted it.
Mm,
Remember me, and I will remember you. In the Quran, we're told of a story where the Virgin Mary is in the pains of labor, and
mhm,
she's told to strike the trunk of the tree, and and then strike the ground. And so what happened was olives fell, and then water, like a spring of water, came
mhm,
out of the ground. But if God had wanted both of those, he could have just made both of those happen. What he's trying to tell us is that we have to do our part and then he'll do his. So whenever I'm in a moment of struggle or a moment of happiness, it's just always trying to be mindful of God's presence and calling upon him and thanking him and understanding who I am according to him, and that
mhm.
I'm just a wanderer in this life, and
Yeah.
I'm doing everything according to his will.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very cool. Um, so I guess moving on, I know that you founded your Minaret Foundation as an interfaith organization. So can you kind of give like a brief background of what it is and maybe how you came to create it?
Sure. When I had found Islam again in like an American Muslim identity context, I came back to Houston and I started a youth organization called Crescent Youth. And one of the key reasons I started that organization was to help other kids who are going through the same journey as me,
Mhm,
help them to have a better relationship with Islam, better relationship with God, and help them to understand in many ways the cultural and the generational differences between them and their parents. So
mhm,
I grew up in a time where it was like if there's a kid who's probably born here and the elders are probably born over there,
yeah,
right? Where now it's a little different, where you
yeah,
still have we have guys like me who were born over there that immigrated here.
mm,
So it was easy to bring them together at the mosque on Fridays. There's a void of youth programs. There's a void of any kind of youth understanding of what Islam was. And most people that I encountered were still Pakistani or Indian or Egyptian or Saudi Muslims who happen to be American and not the other way around. So shifting that identity and really helping forge an American Muslim identity in Houston was something that I was committed to doing. I did that in my volunteer time, in my free time, which ended up being like really like 30 to 40 hours a week, in addition to the business. But I started to age out of youth work, and everyone who works in youth work has that story of when they know that, okay, we're done with, you know, you've aged out is essentially what happens. You age out. And at that time that I was aging out, um, I was being called, and this was sort of the peak of the war on terror during Obama's time.
Mm.
And I was being called to churches, mosques. I was being called to churches, mosques for interfaith events, schools, and Rotary clubs to speak on Islam. Because my background is, I ended up shifting from IT to public relations, website design, is essentially digital communications.
Sure.
So I had a way that I could pitch Islam in a very PR sense. By the way, I spoke English. I was born and raised here, so I understand context. And that's what people wanted. And at that time, most of the imams didn't either speak English, they weren't from here. There's a lot of differentiation. So I kept getting called. And one pastor who I call him like the godfather of interfaith work for me, the Reverend Steve Quill, the Lutheran Church, he took me on a trip with him to the former Yugoslavia. It was I was a Muslim. We had a rabbi who was a sole Jew. There's one Episcopalian, and everyone else is Lutheran. It was like 12 of us, I think. And we went to Macedonia and Croatia, and our goal was to understand the role faith played in the reconciliation efforts post-Yugoslavian war, which was a nasty, absolutely just every war is nasty, but this was like the second genocide in Europe after the Holocaust. Excuse me. So part of what we did was we sat with civic leaders, faith leaders. We sat with all sorts of people to understand from their perspectives what happened in the war, how people started coming back together. And some of the people that we met were war criminals. And one of the individuals that we met told us that, he was the typical from the Rocky movies or from any of the movies back in the late 80s, early 90s, where the Soviets are the enemy. He was the typical looking Slavic guy that, cut jaw, cut cheeks, just like a flat top hair, juiced, a guy that you wouldn't get stuck in an alleyway with. And he had that Slavic accent, right? Like Dolph Lundgren had in Rocky. Anyways, and so he told us that he grew up across, he is a Macedonian Christian, because all Macedonians are pretty much Christian. All Albanians are Muslims because they're ethnically divided. And so the Macedonians, he said he grew up on one side of the street was Macedonians, and the other side of the street, they're Albanian Muslims. And they never interacted with one another. They went to their own places of worship. They went to their own schools. They spoke their own language. They ate their own food. They even played on their own football leagues. There was no reason for them to interact with one another apart from when the football would go to the other person's yard, right? And they'd have to go retrieve it. That was the only interaction. They didn't even go to the same swimming pools, nothing. There was no connection, no interaction ever. Their whole lives, zero interaction. And so when the TV heads started to talk nonsense about the Muslims, it was easy for them to believe it because they didn't know the others, right? Yeah. And he said, when the call to war came out, he looked at me and he said, it was easy for me to kill your people like dogs, right? And that's the moment where I understood what I needed to do moving forward. Because here in the United States, it's not, I know it sounds like a stretch, but it's really not unlike what happened in Macedonia or in Croatia or in Bosnia or Slovenia. So we don't really know each other. We're so proud to have this diversity skill. We're proud to do X, Y, and Z, but how well do we actually know one another? I'm not saying we have to be invited into people's homes, but do we actually know one another? Yeah. And this was pre-Trump, right? Right. During Trump's years, we really got to understand we don't really know one another at all. Like we had no idea that these thoughts and these ideas even existed, which really underscored the work of Minaret Foundation. So Minaret Foundation's, our focus in the early years was just about bringing the Muslim, Jewish, and the Christian communities together. That's it. That's all we're focused on, interfaith engagement. Later on, a few years ago, what it turned into is, well, we've had our dodgeball tournaments, we've had our barbecues and our dialogue discussions. What do we do next? And for the next step is let's leverage our faith traditions to change the world around us. And that's through civic engagement, through policy work. And so the areas that we focus on are food insecurity, child welfare, and religious freedom. But all of this, even these policy areas, comes back to the Macedonian. These are all vehicles for us to get in a car together and to take a road trip and learn more about one another and to deep dive into our relationship, learn more about our kids, learn more about our futures, our past, our struggles, our funny stories, but just to understand one another. That way, because what happens in any country, including Yugoslavia, it's the people in power who divide us. We don't go out in the streets and say, we hate you.
Yeah.
There's always a catalyst. And that catalyst is usually followed by these talking heads or these random people who are like, you should hate this guy. This guy's so different from you. Don't even talk to him. But if we know one another, if we have communication, especially at the leadership level, we can stand together and dispel the myths and the rumors about one another and say, no, this dude is my friend.
Very cool. That's very cool stuff you're doing. I guess, do you have any examples of like what type of events you guys do together or like put out? For example, like your civic engagement events.
Well, I'll talk about the interfaith event real quick. We have a signature interfaith event called the Muslim Jewish Christmas, which sounds really strange, but it's, after the Yugoslavia trip, me and Rabbi Gross was like one of my best friends. Me and Steve sat together at a Pakistani restaurant on Hillcroft, and he was having traditional Pakistani food with me. And he asked me what we do on Christmas. And I'm like, we have nothing to do on Christmas. We just hang out, go to the movies or do something like that, or eat at a Pakistani restaurant. He goes, oh, we also go to the movies and we eat Chinese food. I didn't know any Jews growing up. I grew up in a part of Fort Bend County. There's no Jews there.
Yeah.
There's no, even in Fort Bend County to this day, there's one synagogue in all of Fort Bend County. Right. There just wasn't a big Jewish presence, or maybe they just didn't say I'm Jewish. But he was really, I think I met him at like 29, 30, 31 years of age. He was the first Jew I've ever sat down with and actually talked to, right? That's what I'm talking about. It's like, this is the whole talking to one another bit. Anyway, so he told me to go to movies and eat Chinese food. I always thought that was like an anti-Semitic trope. So I was so surprised. I was like, oh my God, that's something that you guys actually do. But we realized that our community has nothing to do on Christmas Eve. So that year we planned to get our communities together. And the question was, do we bring any Christians? And it's Christmas Eve. What are the Christians going to do? The first year we had Pastor Quill, Reverend Quill, come out, and he gave like a 10-minute talk, and then he left after that. But the Muslim Jewish Christmas is about bringing the Muslim community and the Jewish community together, right? On Christmas Eve for dialogue and discussion. And we have a second follow-up part in the spring. And that's been going on 12 years strong. I think we started off with just us and his synagogue, and now it's like 5-6 synagogues, 5-6 mosques. And this year, actually, in the year 2022, we hope to expand it to 20 cities.
Very cool.
Throughout the country, and that's like a signature program. And we just had a dodgeball, or no, we just had a kickball tournament a few weeks ago, and that was a lot of fun. Muslims versus Jews versus Christians, and the Jews really upped their game this time, and that was really good. And then in late summer, in August, September, we're gonna have a program called Competing in Goodness, where it won't be just limited to Muslims, Jews, and Christians, but it will be faith centers. Faith centers will compete against one another. So imagine the Buddhists competing against the Muslims, competing against the Jews, competing against the Zoroastrians, maybe, to raise the most amount of food for the Houston Food Bank, because September is National Hunger Awareness Month. And then at the end of it, it culminates into this giant potluck in Herman Park, where we have all the faith centers bring their congregants together for this gigantic potluck. And we literally, the whole month we spent raising bread for those in need, and then we're going to end it with breaking bread with one another, right?
Very cool.
And so we leverage those relationships to do more work in the policy field. So for instance, Fort Bend County, we're able to get faith communities together to argue for increased rental assistance, and that was at the beginning of COVID. We got imams and that was very successful, went from 5.1 million to 19.5 million we were able to get at the beginning of the George Floyd incident during his murder. we got all of the imams in Houston, all the rabbis in Houston to sign a letter asking the Mayor in Chief Acevedo for meaningful police reform and to take 1, 2, 3 steps towards it. And those steps happened. And myself and the president of the Rabbinical Association at the time were appointed to the Police Reform Task Force. We've created multi-faith advisory councils for HPD and for the Fort Bend County Judge's Office. And recently we lobbied together to create a food insecurity board for the city of Houston, which was also successful. And so it's identifying these small policy points, which we all have in common, because all of us can say we care about those who are hungry. All of us can say we care about our children. All of us can say we want to be able to worship in the way that we choose, right? Religious freedom. And these are 3 commonalities that we can just get together on without any qualms.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's very good. So I guess, like, for those who are kind of stubborn in their faith, in the sense that they're very strong in their faith and they think their faith is the right way, how do you think, like, I don't know if you've ever encountered someone who's like that. So how can you kind of help them see eye to eye with other faiths? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yep. I think the first thing that we have to do, and I always tell our community this, is sometimes hate and confusion and stereotypes have been presented to us, all of us, every one of us, on a silver platter. It's been beautified, made to look nice, and it's also been made digestible. So the talking heads and the people who peddle racism and prejudice, they don't necessarily just do it and say, Muslims are all terrorists. We'll say Muslims are different from us. We'll say Muslims do things differently. Right. Muslims believe differently. Muslims believe in Sharia. And they take it step by step by step by step. But where hate becomes inculcated subconsciously, we don't even realize sometimes. We driving down a road, look at someone from a different ethnicity or a group, we're like, all those people. Right. And all of us have said these things, right? We've all fallen into these tropes at one point or another. Whenever I talk to a faith leader who's never met a Muslim, I start off by talking about our children. I talk about how we like our steak. I talk about the time I smoked dino ribs on my new smoker. I talk about surfing. I talk about X-Files or different I find ways to create commonality between us. And once we can see each other as humans, and I know that sounds strange because sometimes, we we interact with 1 million people throughout the year. We may interact with dozens of people, including our UPS guy, our mail guy, the lady at the McDonald's, the person at the Chick-fil-A. And we just let these people pass on by in our lives, right? We have these touch points that God puts these people in our lives for a reason, but everyone just passes on by for whatever reason. We can't interact with everyone in a meaningful way, but we can try to slow down and say, hey, how's your day? How's it going with you? My name is Sis. What's your name? Is your day going well? Just small little interactions. Once we're able to slow things down and start to see each other as people instead of just touch points or interactions throughout the day, I think that's when a shift in relationships, that's when a shift in community ties starts to occur. So whenever I meet new faith leaders, it's just trying to get them to see me as a regular dude and for me to see them as regular people as well, right? And after we can see each other with commonalities, that's when we can start talking about our differences. And differences is a conversation that we have to have. We have to talk about how Jesus plays different roles in our life or no role in our life, right? We have to talk about what role Muhammad, peace be upon him, plays, or what role faith plays in my life, what role the common cultural discussions that are happening right now in the United States, what role they play in our lives. And that's how we start to understand and unravel all this mysticism that we've been enshrouded in by either our subconscious mistakes or by people in charge who want to keep us separate. So in a long-winded way, I would tell people to deliberately get to know your neighbor, because at the end of the day, your children will be playing tag with them, regardless of the color of the skin, who they worship, or how they think. they will still be playing tag and hide and go seek together. So might as well get to know one another a little.
Yeah, right. Very good. So I guess what about for those who are non-religious or opposed to religion at all? Has your foundation ever tried to kind of reach out to them?
Well, that's a really good question, and we don't necessarily interact with
Mhm.
people who are irreligious or agnostic or of no faith. Our organization's focus is to interact with people of faith. That being said, the policy work that we do in child welfare and food insecurity
Mhm.
oftentimes intersects with organizations that have no faith tradition, which
Mhm.
is which
Yeah.
is fine in the NGO space, right? And that works. And we and oftentimes we interact with people who have no faith,
Mhm.
or looking for a different faith. But that doesn't really come up because what we're focused on is how can we make our children's lives better? How can we ensure that all people have access to healthy, nutritious food?
Yeah.
So faith comes up with our faith partners when we're deliberately talking with the Methodists or the Lutherans or the Baptists or the Jews or the Hindus or the Sikhs or the Buddhists. That's when faith comes up. But when we're talking about policy, if we're not with our faith partners, we don't necessarily bring up faith. People know that we carry our faith on our shoulders and it guides us in everything that we do, but it doesn't necessarily need to come up because we're talking about how do we ensure that no child has to face trauma.
Mhm. Very cool. Yeah. And I guess going a little backwards, what was your planning process for the foundation? So how did you like organize the planning of it, get support for it, etc.? What was the process like?
Well, I was lucky in that I was exiting Crescent Youth and I had name recognition in the Muslim community. And so it was easier for me to create an organization, Minaret Foundation, in the Muslim community because people sort of had an understanding of who I was, what I wanted to do, what my
Mhm.
reputation was like. And outside of the community, I had Reverend Quill, I had Rabbi Groves, and I had developed this entire network of individuals, and it was a vacuum at the time when I had started. I mean, there's no other organizations that are focused on interfaith work, and still to this day, Minaret Foundation is the only organization in the city that has a focus on interfaith work in the Muslim community.
Mm.
And so it's easier for people to find us
Yeah.
rather than us to find them, especially because during the Obama years and especially during the Trump years, people really wanted to know who these Muslims were. Who are these crazy neighbors of ours that are joining Al Qaeda and ISIS? Not true. Who are these crazy neighbors joining and doing all this stuff? Let's get to know them a little bit.
Mhm.
And so they'd find us on the interwebs and Google us and reach out. We had so many contacts, calls. Our phone would be ringing continuously throughout the week, booking speaking engagements. And so again, it comes back to because our focus is the American Muslim identity. It's just like it was in Crescent Youth, and now it is in Minaret
Yeah.
Foundation. Is how do we get people to understand who we are as a people, not to come or be invited to our faith, but just know who your neighbors are. I think that approach has been meaningful, and approach has been welcomed by other people,
Mm.
and that's what's helped us grow and
Yeah.
become who we are today.
Mm. Yeah. Was there anyone or any organization that kind of was opposed to your idea that you encountered?
Um, I think any NGO that starts off will always go through that. There's going to be other NGOs that are going to be opposed to it.
Yeah.
There's some NGOs that are going to say we're so big, we're the largest, we should just be doing everything. Come under us or just eliminate yourself. We still have that issue.
Yeah.
There's organizations that are still like we're the biggest, we're the baddest. We should, X, Y, and Z. And it's like, all right. But the world is I'm often remembered of did you ever see the Hubble telescopes? It's like it looked back on Earth from Saturn's rings.
Uh,
And saw that we're just this
yeah.
little speck. It's like, who cares? It's like the world is big enough, man.
Yeah.
The world is big enough. Houston is so big. It's
Hmm.
bigger than I think Rhode Island and Connecticut or something like that, or Vermont. I
Hmm.
don't I don't know what it is. It doesn't matter. There's just so much room to do the work, and
Yeah.
there's so much work to be done. There was a dozen Minaret foundations out there. I don't think that would be enough.
Mm. Yeah. Very cool. And so what year did you start the foundation?
That's a little sketchy.
Oh.
I guess it depends on what year did I start doing speak. Because when I first started doing
Oh.
speak engagements, I was still with Crescent Youth, and I would call myself an interfaith activist.
Mm,
Transitioned to interfaith coordinator, did an interfaith director stint for a little bit. I
mhm.
just had these made up titles. I didn't know, because people, when you get invited to a church or a synagogue or social club, people want to know, this guy is, what's his title and what's his
Mhm.
organization,
Yeah.
right? Um, so on the way to South Padre Island with the with a dear friend of mine, Nan, we came up with the name Minaret Foundation, and that was in 2010.
Okay.
And so afterwards, I created a website,
Mm.
put up content, created a business card, and I said, I'm with Minaret Foundation. But I was a one-man show for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
For about 8 years, I was a one-man show. But I had friends with me who would go on speaking. They would do their own speaking
Yeah.
engagements. They would all do it under the Minaret name. We had volunteers, we had programming, but for the most part, it was just me.
Very cool. And so what does minaret mean?
Well, minaret is like a spire that's
Oh,
attached to a mosque. So if you've got a mosque
oh,
in traditional mosque settings overseas, you'll see like there's a giant pole or like this
yeah.
giant
Okay. Yeah.
tower next to the mosque. That's called the minaret. So it's part of the architecture.
Okay. And why
So
did you
it's like a peak.
okay. And so is that kind of why you chose that name? Because it has
No, actually, I didn't realize the importance of that name until maybe last year when an imam, Dr. Muhammad Haq
Mm.
of the Webster area said, "Oh, minarets, this, and you do the peak type of work. You're like a pinnacle, this and that." I'm like, wow, that's a good
Wow.
idea. At the time when I was trying to figure out a name, I just wanted something unique.
Yeah.
I just want to think of something unique, something that hadn't been taken out as a
Mhm.
.com, and something that no one else was using. And that was my main motivation, something that sounded cool that I could make a nice logo around.
Right.
That's really, it was just because we're just on such a pressure to
Mm.
find an organization name. And then even like just a few years ago, I realized I should never have chosen the name Minaret Foundation. So whenever we go into meetings, especially with NGOs,
Mm.
we'll go into a meeting with another nonprofit, and their development director will be there, or their development associate, or one of their board members will be there. And then in the beginning, it was like, oh, that's cool. Why is there a fundraiser here? People started to see, people thought that we were a grant making organization, that we wanted to meet with them because we wanted to give them a lot of money, because it's a foundation.
Yeah.
Foundations
Yeah.
are not, and I wasn't that much in the nonprofit. I just thought it was a cool name.
Yeah.
But now when any of our staff, any of our policy analysts or administrator
Mm.
will go into meeting and there's a development person there, it's like, okay, we want to start this meeting off by letting you know we're not a grant making organization. Uh,
That's
yeah.
funny. Yeah. So like where did you get most of your funding from for the organization? Or how do you like continuously gather funding?
Yeah, most of our funding comes from individuals within the Muslim community. We
Mm.
have a growing base of donors outside of our community as well, especially as we scale the Muslim Jewish Christmas,
Mm.
and our faith events get a little larger. We're doing a lot of work for the Uyghur people. You see, there's a little
Oh,
Uyghur
okay.
scarf right
Yeah.
there. And so as we do more activism for an advocacy for, not activism, as we do more advocacy for the Uyghur people, we get a lot more funds from outside of the community as well, because people identify with the Uyghur cause. It hurts them. And a lot of people don't know how to counter the CCP.
Mm.
And so our work is done through our national partners in Washington, D.C. And as we do our advocacy for the Uyghurs, more and more people learn about us, and they start to become monthly donors. And so most of our base is monthly donors, and most of our donors right now are Muslim.
Very cool. And what have been some of the things you've done for like the Uyghur population?
So we work with two partners in Washington, D.C., the Campaign for Uyghurs and the Uyghur Human Rights Project.
Okay.
Because our focus is Texas. As Minaret Foundation, we're not focused on the big show, which is the federal work. Our focus is on Texas.
Mm.
In many ways, Texas is the bellwether state. And what that means is, it's to say that if a law or policy can get implemented in the state of Texas in bipartisan fashion, it can be done anywhere throughout the country.
Mm.
So our focus has been Texas, the Texas congressional delegation. And whenever there's a bill that UHRP or CFU are working on in DC, they throw it to us so we can start getting congressperson in Texas signed on to those bills. More importantly, our focus with Uyghurs here is the grassroots movement. In order to create more awareness about the genocide and the pains of the Uyghur people, we have to ensure that people at all levels of government are aware of what's going on, especially because the CCP is so entrenched. And our trade partners, China is I think Harris County did $4.6 billion of trade 2 years ago with China. And so our issue isn't with the Chinese people. Our issue is with the government, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And so what we're doing at the local level is we're introducing resolutions and policies in commissioners' courts at city councils to not only recognize the Uyghur genocide, but to also watch where they're budgeting and how much of their budgeting comes from overseas.
Very cool. Yeah, my mom was actually born in the Xinjiang area, which is like where
Oh, she was.
yeah,
Oh,
because my grandparents, they're from Shanghai, but they were sent by the like back then they had government projects, so they were like sent to the area. But yeah, my mom grew up there for like a decade of her life.
so your
Yeah,
mom's Han.
yeah, she's Han, but they grew up there, and she has like a lot of memories there. But she always tells me how she's kind of like what you said about the like Macedonians and your friend, like she never talked to a single Uyghur. They kind of just lived in their own bubble.
The food is good.
Yeah, no, it is. We always go to like Uyghur restaurants. Yeah, very cool. But this area has always been like an interest of mine as well. So very cool to see that you guys are doing that. Um, Another question I had is like running this foundation as an Asian American. I guess it kind of was like an automatic thing since you did say like you're Pakistani and that's why you're Muslim. So, but how do you think it would be different if maybe like a non-Asian American ran the organizations? I don't know if it would make a difference, if any.
I don't think it would make a difference because our focus isn't Asia or Pakistan. It's not, meaning our base and our roots are Muslim and Islam. And I'll give you an example. Half of our staff are not Muslim. Half of our staff are actually Hispanic Catholic.
Okay.
At a point, there was only 2 Muslims in the organization and everyone else was Hispanic Catholic. And so 33% or 20% of us were the only Muslims that were part of the organization. I think if I wasn't Asian, if I was, let's say, Middle Eastern, or if I was African, or if I was just a Caucasian Muslim, I don't think it would make any difference in terms of the reach. In fact, if I was a Caucasian Muslim, it might even actually help me
Right.
move things a little bit faster. But as a South Asian Muslim that's leading Minaret Foundation, the key difference between myself and maybe another ethnicity is how we're perceived by the wider community. But it wouldn't really make a difference because our focus isn't, the subcontinent or Asia proper. It's here in the United States, and that's all we're focused on, with the exception being making sure that we're having advocacy and the voices of the Uyghurs are heard.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess we're coming close to the end. Is there anything else that you would like to add or advise?
I always end any discussion by encouraging everyone who's watching or listening or reading to make sure that they're deliberate about reaching across the aisle, talking to their neighbors, and especially talking to people that they vehemently disagree with. Not just disagree with, but vehemently, ferociously, they just disagree with them. And just to share an apple pie, just to share a glass of water or a cup of tea, or just to go shake their hand and say, my name is this, what's your name? If that's the only conversation, create these create these mini touch points to build on top of and to create a relationship. Because at the end of the day, we all want a good roof over our heads, our children to be fed peaceful lives. We all want to watch Obi-Wan Kenobi's next 3 to 4 seasons. We all want to go to Disneyland and go to the beach. We all want the same things. It's just the little things that we differ on. And we have to put that into perspective. It's the little things that we differ on, not the big things.
Mhm.
And when we create these touch points in relationships with people that we differ with, it's easier to see that, it's easier to contextualize it.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, it was very nice speaking with you, meeting you. Thank you for everything again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Helen.